There are China-US trade talks starting as we speak in Switzerland today. Is this a sign that Trump is thawing on his China trade war?
It may be. Let's see where these talks go. I mean, I think it's important to underscore, Matt, that for the last 3 weeks, the President of the United States has falsely claimed that direct talks were underway between the United States and China in an effort to alleviate the tariff burden. We now know that was flatly untrue. And the reason we know it is because his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, testifying on Capitol Hill under oath last week, finally told the truth and said actually there'd been no communication whatsoever. So that then led to a flurry of activity behind the scenes where the Trump administration had basically been saying to the Chinese, we'd love to talk, but for it to happen, President Xi has to ask us to engage in talks. And President Xi, not being that kind of a leader, said, I'm not going to ask them anything. I'll just wait. So finally, these talks have now been created and are taking place. Donald Trump mused yesterday about the possibility of reducing American tariffs on China to 80%. There's a whole range, but, you can assume that they're roughly an average of about 145% at the moment, with some tariffs on some goods even higher than that. But for the Americans and for the Chinese, the clock here is really ticking. And the Chinese know that the real consequences of Donald Trump's trade war are only about to bite because containers are not moving. The flurry of activity before the tariffs were implemented to get goods in from China has already taken place. So now there's nothing coming into the United States. The director of the Port of Los Angeles was saying last week that he thinks 20% of dockers and cargo drivers may have their employment at stake, on the line in the Greater Los Angeles area, because there is so little traffic moving, so few containers arriving. So Donald Trump is going to find himself under increased pressure in the weeks ahead because prices in America are going to soar and there will be supply chain shortages on the shelves. So the Chinese think he's now ready to make a deal. 80%? Is that an acceptable level of tariff? Is that a deal?
I mean, it's a hell of a lot. Exactly. There was also, when I was in the States, which was, I think, astonishing just a few days ago, there was what I would like to call Barbiegate, when Trump suggested that actually girls don't need $30 for Christmas. They can deal with $2 for Christmas that maybe cost a little bit more. Now, I couldn't possibly comment, right? But Trump is not the kind of guy who normally talks, a low Barbie game. He wants lots of dolls in his life.
Well, there's a direct contradiction, right? I've introduced a new golden age to the United States. It's Liberation Day with these tariffs, but actually you've got to tell the kids they can only have $2 instead of 30. And it's been compounded this week by his own Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who found himself on Fox News earlier in the week, asked by even a Fox News primetime host, how are you going to explain this to the kids? And he said that the answer to that question is you have to sit the children down and you have to tell them that thanks to Donald Trump, their lives and the lives of their families are eventually going to be great.
Right.
Just not yet.
Yes.
I mean,
and the key word is eventually, isn't it? Because with all these, even if the tariff policies of Liberation Day were to work, bringing back jobs to the Rust Belt, which frankly I think is incredibly doubtful given AI, given robotics and automation. If you're going to lose money on trade with China, you're going to make money at home by not employing more workers. That seems obvious to me. But even if that were to work, in the interim, which could take years, he's got a problem with empty shelves. So is that what we're seeing? The overall picture, having fired on all fronts on Liberation Day on the 2nd of April, are we seeing, in a rather messy way, Donald J. Trump in retreat?
Well, I think we are seeing him in retreat partially, but not in sufficient retreat that he's walking away from the whole idea of tariffs. Indeed, if you look at what the White House said yesterday about the trade deal with the UK, they really doubled down, insisting that the 10% baseline tariff that remains in force against pretty much everything that isn't steel, aluminium, or 100,000 British-made cars, that is going to be in place for perpetuity. There is no plan on the part of the Trump administration ever to offer anything less than a 10% baseline tariff. So, if he says to the Chinese 80% for you, the Chinese, having witnessed the UK negotiation, as every other country has now done, will say to themselves, well, we don't want to be stuck with this 80% tariff for the rest of time, so maybe we'll play hardball and just dig in our heels and wait for the consequences of all of this to build up in the United States.
On India-Pakistan, Trump said just a few days ago he wants to see a ceasefire. J.D. Vance then suddenly said, actually, we're not going to get involved in that one, maybe because it's too complicated for them. I mean, the reason why a war was averted, a full-scale war was averted in 2019 is because they did get involved. America does get involved. It hasn't really got a choice about whether to get involved or not. What's going to happen this time?
Well, Marco Rubio tried to engage in some outreach to the Indian and Pakistani leadership last night, and there were some talks between him and his opposite numbers there. Look, I think there is a reality here. There has never been an American government less ready, less qualified, and less equipped with staff.
Or even less interested.
Or interest to deal with the complexities of the Kashmir crisis. You've been there. I've reported from there. This is an intractable conflict that has been going on for decades, and it requires specialist knowledge and a commitment to nuanced diplomacy and statecraft, even if you're simply going to talk these two countries down from the ledge. And this Trump administration has absolutely no one in place capable of doing that. Not a single person.
Even though President Trump says that he gets on famously with Narendra Modi, his most glorious foreign visit when he was president the first time around was the one to India, where he went to the Modi Stadium outside Delhi, I think it was, the biggest stadium in India, and he got this incredible, rapturous welcome. I mean, the two guys see eye to eye on lots of issues.
Right, but does anybody honestly think Donald Trump could find Kashmir on a map? This is a president of the United States who can't pick up the phone and call the American ambassador to India for advice, because there isn't one. He can't pick up the phone and call the American ambassador to Pakistan for advice because there isn't one. Yeah. So, I mean, and look at the State Department, the National Security Council hollowed out, Marco Rubio now running both of them, Secretary of State and his National Security Advisor in his spare time. They haven't got the bandwidth and they haven't got the expertise and the capacity to take this on. And that should worry all of us, because traditionally, as you say, the Americans would be the natural power to go in there and try and talk both of them off the ledge.
I wonder if Steve Witkoff has been given a call to say, by the way, forget about Gaza at the moment, forget about Ukraine, forget about Iran. Maybe you should, do a bit of a dogleg to Delhi or to Islamabad. Finally, domestically, the war between the Trump administration and the judiciary has been up to notch, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Massive story this yesterday. Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, said that President Trump is looking at the possibility of suspending habeas corpus, which is the writ that lies at the heart of every democracy's judicial system. It's the bit that says lawyers can go into court and say, you've detained someone illegally, you need to release them to us.
Why are they saying that now?
And they're saying it because they argue that judges are preventing Donald Trump from engaging in mass deportations, although, to be fair, Donald Trump has engaged in mass deportations in flagrant violation of court orders. And unless the judiciary stops trying to cut him off at the pass, they are going to suspend habeas corpus so that there will be no constitutional protections at all for these deportees. It's a huge upping of the ante by the White House in the war against the judiciary, and also parenthetically in the war against Congress, because ultimately, of course, it would be Congress that would have to decide if this core principle of American jurisprudence was simply going to be eviscerated.
Finally and briefly, Simon, that this will end up in the Supreme Court, won't it?
Yes.
And the Supreme Court has ruled against him in the past. They're going to do so again on this, aren't they?
Well, maybe they will. I mean, presumably they will. But, the ultimate question, as we've talked about on the programme before, that we're going to learn the answer to in the next months is whether Donald Trump is willing to respect US Supreme Court decisions and opinions.
In a court that where he appointed the majority.
Or is he just going to steamroller it and ignore them?